Greetings, brave adventurers, and welcome to The Keep. My name is Lindsey the Keeper, and it is my duty to tell cringy tales from r/RPG horror stories to protect reality from eldritch horrors with the help of my little friend, Tao. So I think I have mentioned in my videos a few times about how much I personally enjoy homebrew games, but I don't think I ever said why that is. Homebrew games are taking inspiration from many different things and turning it into a story of where you are telling the story and the players interact with the world around it. Best way I can give an example of it is Crown of Candy from Dimension 20, where the setting is a mixture of Game of Thrones meets Candyland. Besides how silly it sounds, it turns out to be such a great story that a few sessions later, Matt Mercer DMs the prequel, The Ravening Roar, where it takes place 20 years before Crown of Candy happened, and see how those events affect how DM Brennan Lee Mulligan played the campaign Crown of Candy. I personally have thought of making campaigns loosely based off of BioWare's Dragon Age or Mass Effect, or even Gravity Falls or Supernatural. Believe it or not, a lot of homebrew worlds are a mix of the DM's own creativity and inspiration from media to make their campaigns come to life. In today's saga, OP wrote 5 stories about a Revolutionary War-inspired fantasy game that has suffered through hardships in one way or another. Now, sit back, relax, cuddle up to your favorite tendril as we dive in on this saga. Enjoy! The first story by our author of these tales is user, hopefully I say his name right, user subsensational_rich3991 writes their title as "A great campaign fell apart when players started killing each other." So, been playing D&D with this online group for about 7 sessions until this happened. Setting is DM's homebrew Revolutionary War-inspired fantasy, which I was skeptical at first, but it in fact turned out sweet. It's clearly his love child and well thought out. Think your basic D&D with muskets and a revolution going on. Party is DM, a male human scout rogue played by me, a male elf gunslinger fighter, Matthew Mercer's homebrew which was approved by all during session 0, female elf divine soul sorcerer, and a male bard artificer multi-class. Players are the same genders as characters. I wish this wasn't relevant. The central conflict for the session is that the local militia, something fancy Minutemen, are at odds with the rebels' army, despite these two factions generally fighting at the same side against a third army, because militia/civilians claim a local village has been sacked by the rebel army, while rebel army proclaims that wasn't their men. Now, my character is part of the militia, and the fighter is part of the rebel army, so we have a great narrative clash at the start of the session, but in character decides to hold off hostilities and find out more, despite both characters convinced their faction is innocent. The party sets out to investigate and splits up. Me and the fighter go to follow a lead, while the bard artificer and the sorcerer follow another. Fast forward, the sorcerer and bard artificer find evidence that the sorcerer's sister, NPC played by DM, apparently with consent and cooperation from the sorcerer, is a minor antagonist who's been undermining rebel efforts. The sorcerer and bard artificer go to confront her. Well, here the bard artificer says he intends to with this NPC since her actions got a lot of people killed, so it seems at the moment anyways. He's been sleeping around all campaign, but until now, it has always been consensual. Sorcerer states she's not okay with this and says they should take her to trial instead, and does a nice bit of describing her character's emotional reaction to her conflicting loyalties. So, During session 0, we went over what content is fine and what isn't via a survey, and there were no topics that were off limits to any of the players, and nobody flashes their X card either, so until now, so far so good. Bard Artificer keeps insisting, which to me it seems like he didn't want to lose phase by backing down, and the Sorcerer says she'll fight him if he tries. They fight, and unsurprisingly, the Sorcerer who's mostly got healing and support spells goes to 0 HP. She also had the only revive spell in the party. At this point, the fighter and I arrive at the scene, since the spellcaster fight was not exactly quiet. Fighter is a lieutenant with the army and has a platoon of soldiers following him. He says he wants to kill the Bard Artificer, and DM says that as far as he's concerned, the characters has means and authority to do so. The fighter orders the Bard Artificer executed by firing squad for looting, and the NPC soldiers do that with some brilliant narration from the DM. Meanwhile, the Sorcerer's been failing her death saves. The DM relatively blatantly allows me to make a run to the army barracks to fetch a healing potion to save her at the last minute, which my character probably shouldn't have been fast enough to make it. Now the Bard Artificer flips. He says the DM is favoring the Sorcerer and killing his character when he should have lived and letting the Sorcerer live when she should have died, as well as giving the fighter too much power in form of the soldiers and NPCs. There was a long story involving with him getting there. Bard Artificer disconnects from the game while his character is being executed. Execution commences, the DM is visibly upset by this turn of events, and everyone just kind of leaves. I haven't spoken to them since, and don't know if the campaign will continue. All this without much red flags prior. End of story 1. Personally speaking, I like games where technology is sort of the new age of science and it mixes with magic in the game system. I think mainly because in real life, we are already surrounded by technology. Computers, TVs, cell phones, tablets, almost everything that we have and how we connect to people is mostly through that technology. But back to the story. The concept of a homebrew campaign is not something new, but basing it on the Revolutionary War has an interesting concept to it. However, it seems like even though you all had Session 0 and had the X cards in hand, it looks like not everyone was being honest about what they were and weren't okay with. This is why Session 0 is so important. If you are not comfortable with certain things, like SA, body horror, the harming of children and animals, you need to speak up about it. Because if you don't, there will be a session where that one thing you are not comfortable with is going to pop up like an unwanted ad and you don't have an ad blocker to stop it. Well, besides leaving the game or muting yourself until the group tells you it's okay to come back. The second story that OP wrote has the long title, A Murder Hobo Tries to Make the Campaign About Him, Is Too Dumb to Live and Lives Anyways. So, we had this campaign for 9 sessions. 2 sessions ago, we lost a player, but after some nice comments from folks here, I messaged the other players and asked whether they'd like to pick it back up. DM says sure, but he wants to look for more players since we are down to 3. 2 new players interested in our campaign joined our virtual table, and we had a session 0.1. DM goes over the campaign settings. It's his homebrew Revolutionary War inspired D&D with Muskets world, and all that. Now, the first new player has no prior experience from D&D. He says he wants to be a halfling druid, and he wants to be level 1. The rest of us are level 7. That's right, he wants to intentionally nerf himself. The player just says he wants to be the Merry or Pippin to us actual heroes. His words. The DM says he'd be insta-killed by level 7 encounters, so they finally agree that he has the HP of a level 7 character, but all other attributes of a level 1 character. The other player wants to be a fighter, but doesn't want to play something someone else is already playing. DM suggests he goes barbarian, to which he begrudgingly agrees. He rolls his stats and gets a 7, 8, 9, 9, 11, and 14. He flips, stating that his campaign is ruined. DM says that if others agree, he can use standard array instead. We let him. He then gets into a 30-minute argument with the DM whether a bayonet should count as a finesse weapon. Story-wise, he joins our party, whose uniting motivation is gaining independence for the island/continent/country we are at, with the motivation of vengeance to the antagonist army for killing his dog. His only ambition is to kill as many black jacket goons as possible, and that is super simplistic compared to everyone else at the table. And it's not like he came in not knowing this was a narrative campaign. But we shrug it off and hope he will flesh it out as we go. Druid, meanwhile, insists he wants to be a cook for the rebel army, our side. DM warns he, in character, would need to accept orders from Fighter, who's a lieutenant with them, but he says that's fine. So the party is me, Scout Rogue, Storywise, a Metella man, Divine Soul Sorcerer, a nun and a nurse for the rebel army, Gunslinger Fighter, a lieutenant with the rebel army, Barbarian, tagging along the army for revenge but refuses to have his character be enlisted or any such because he doesn't trust authorities. He doesn't want to join the Metella either. Go figure. Druid, cook for the rebel army. First session goes fine. Both new players kinda do their own thing, but we figure they just need time to grow into our already established campaign. The Druid is mostly interested in cooking all sorts of delicacies for the NPC platoon Fighter has attached to him due to his soldier background. DM uses soldier NPCs to engage with Druid, including one Sergeant Appleman, and he seems to have fun, even if he has little interest in the actual campaign at first. Barbarian seems fine too, except for constantly wanting to get in brawls with our NPC soldiers and, well, everyone. But we figure at least a few would be down for that, and DM lets him do his thing. Then, at the end of the session, we get our first magic item ever. It's a low magic setting. The magic is there, but it's rare. The item is a pair of talismans the Fighter finds on a dead enemy officer. He and Sorcerer finally figured out they can be used to talk to the owner of the other one whenever. Barbarian immediately demands Fighter to give him the other talisman. Fighter refuses. Then Barbarian turns to DM and complains Fighter is being favored. DM says it was just about the perception roll. Barbarian whines some more how he's not having fun because everyone else is getting all the toys. Me, Sorcerer, and Druid are having fun even if we have no toys. DM then sighs and gives him a verbal bayonet. That sounds OP, but it isn't since we are in a campaign where enemies are many but with low health pools, and they all have guns and usually try to actively avoid melee. It shuts him up. Then the next session comes along. Relevant plot is the friendly army is trying to surprise double back around the antagonist army to cut their supplies lines because it's too weak to fight head on. Me and Fighter have spent many sessions scouting the location where they'll go. Sorcerer is on a diplomatic job towards a governor of a town whom she is trying to convince to support the rebels. Barbarian insisted he goes with her, so he went. Party is split. DM resolves these two locations separately. I wanted to spectate the other half anyway because I had COVID and nothing better to do. Only Sorcerer, Bard, and DM were there and me listening in. On the way, Barbarian wants to sleep with Sorcerer. Sorcerer refuses. They get there. Sorcerer goes inside to talk, and Barbarian is demanded to remain outside. Turns out the intel that this guy was neutral was bogus, and he ordered his guards to take Sorcerer captive. It's looking like an encounter, but Sorcerer says she'd rather surrender because she doesn't want to give away she's a magic user and she won't make it to the next session. So she gets taken captive. Her intention is to use the political power of the church to talk herself free. Barbarian doesn't take this well. He says to the guy who captured Sorcerer that he wants to negotiate. The guy comes out but smartly stays out of melee range. Barbarian says he wants to trade information for Sorcerer. The guy agrees to that. Barbarian proceeds to tell him where the rebel army is secretly going. That's right, the very move we've been going towards for several sessions, the saving grace of the attrition-struck rebel army. He then demands the guy releases the Sorcerer. The guy says, "Lol, no," and goes back to his mansion. Barbarian accuses DM of lying to him. DM says that the NPC lied. Deal with it. Next day is the session for me, Fighter, and Druid. Barbarian has also shown up. He asks if he could also participate since my own session was shit. DM sighs and suppose the time frame maybe makes sense if you don't look too closely, and Barbarian had the fastest horse on the continent. The day of the deceived battle, where our friendly 5,000 NPC soldiers, the last hope of the rebellion, are supposed to gain themselves some supplies and liberate enemies of theirs. Out of character, I know they're walking towards an ambush, but my character doesn't know, so I'm very curious of how this will go. Barbarian fails to mention that he told the intentions to the enemy too, even though he in character knew. Druid and Fire doesn't know out of character either. Fighter hands me one of the talismans and sends me and my NPC pals ahead of the army among other scouts. My character has no reason to disagree. Sure enough, I spot a bunch of enemy soldiers. Then another. I contact Fighter. DM asks Fighter for a roll about how well does he understand what does this information combined to some other scouts reports mean. Nat 20. Well, shit, man. You understand damn well. DM gives him the information to deduce what a disaster is about to happen and lets him come up with a plan to salvage it. Fighter immediately runs over to the NPCs in command of the rebel army. He goes, "So yeah, about how we suggested this would be a great idea to do? Not anymore. It appears the enemy has figured it out." Persuasion roll 3. The NPCs tell Fighter to f*** off. The Barbarian isn't having it. He announces his intention to beat the NPCs up to make them listen. A moment of silence. Fighter goes, that's not how armies work." DM warns him that will likely get his character killed. Well, our Barbarian isn't having it. He charges the group of NPCs. Fighter tries to grapple him, but fails. Barbarian describes him tossing the Fighter to a pit of mud. Okay. The NPC soldiers intercepts the Barbarian, who lucks out and manages to verpal one of them before getting subdued. The NPCs he tried to assault order him executed. Druid and Fighter watch as our Barbarian is tied to a pole and the soldier NPCs deal 457 damage into his health pool of 70. Barbarian says he's not dead because Sorcerer cast Death Ward on him during last session. DM says that would be expired by now, but Barbarian says it was an extended Death Ward. Sorcerer is not there and neither me or DM can remember whether it was so. DM sighs and gives in. Soldier NPCs come to check on Barbarian, who is riddled with holes and in terrible pain, and pretends he is dead. NPCs fail their perception rolls and toss Barbarian to a corpse cart along with soldiers who have died of a pox or dysentery. DM asks him to roll for contagion 5. Yep, you have dysentery and pox, pal. Oh, and you lost the verbal bayonet. Meanwhile, Fighter and Druid witness a military disaster. They're eventually sent forward to slow the enemy down to buy remnants of the rebel army time to escape, along with a bunch of NPC soldiers. A suicide job, more or less. Fighter rolls badly and ends up at 0 HP, but passes his death saves. DM asks for a roll from the dreaded grievous wounds table. 2. Shot through the spine. How these work in our campaign is that healer classes can heal via healing spell slots, but it takes too long. Sergeant Appleman throws fighter to one soldier and druid to the other and leads the remnants of the NPC platoon to safety after their job is done. Meanwhile, I just hide. Eventually, everyone scrapes back to a safe house in the woods our party has been using before. So now we have a PC who is suffering -3 to all stats because of sickness, and a PC who cannot walk, and the PC who could heal them is held captive by the antagonist faction. Barbarian announces he wants to beat Fighter up. Fighter goes, why? Barbarian says that for screwing the battle up. Fighter points out that it makes zero sense to blame one lieutenant for it. Barbarian says his character doesn't know that. Also, he wants to take the magic talisman. I point out that he might be interpreting rage a bit too literal. Fighter says since his character is lying half conscious in a pool of blood, he will allow Barbarian to succeed at beating him up. Barbarian finds it disappointing. Apparently, the player really enjoys combat RP and describing his character's moves. However, NPC platoon is still around. Fighter has put up a lot of time on engaging with the NPC platoon and helped them out over the campaign, including saving some of them from being falsely hung, so they think he's a pal. So after he punches Fighter, they all round up around him and punch him back. I really wanted my character to join in that, but ended up not joining cause in character it wouldn't have made sense. Barbarian finds this intervention unfair since it's supposed to be him against Fighter. DM goes, "Dude, you go bang up their wounded Louis. What do you think they'll do?" The soldiers turn Barbarian into mice meat, and DM states this is represented by a temporary penalty of -10 to all stats. After a moment of silence, Barbarian states, "I think my intelligence turned negative." After another moment of silence, DM, audibly trying to hold back laughter, says, "That sounds about right." Barbarian just shrugs and says, "I suppose there's still bullets stuck in my head or something." DM promised he will have a chat with Barbarian about how his character cannot always be at the center of attention, so we will see how it goes. I kind of feel bad for the DM because he clearly tried to accommodate for the Barbarian and make him enjoy the campaign. I think after losing the previous player, DM was afraid for the continuation of his campaign and let a lot of shit pass for it. End of story 2. So, there are about 3 different issues I have with the story in general because of how either the players handle it or the DM handled it. First, let's talk about Druid. Druid wanted to be at level 1 instead of being at the current level, which was level 7. Even though DM did give the Druid the HP of a level 7 character, doesn't mean the rest of him has the same effect. Look, if you compare what you start with as a level 1 Druid versus what you get as a level 7 Druid, you can see that there are giant differences on levels. If the campaign was maybe at a level or 2 ahead of a level 1 character, I might let it go since the first 2 levels are easy to get there, versus trying to make that same jump from a level 1 to a level 7. If Druid had really insisted on being a lower level, I would have been like, okay, but you are going to be 1 or 2 levels difference from the group, and there will be ways for you to catch up to them. Now, the Barbarian. Where do I start with them? Let's start at the beginning, where Barbarian basically stated that he didn't want to be a fighter because there is already a fighter in the team. Which is a fair point. Depending on what system you are playing on, I can see why they didn't want to do that. However, Barbarian could have played a different type of fighter. Since fighter in the story was a gunslinger, Barbarian could have played like a Battle Master fighter or an Echo Knight or something since DM is allowing homebrew stuff into the game. He had options if he wanted to be a fighter still. Then it came with the refusal of joining the rebel army or the other army. If part of the grand story is involving the players to join the rebel side, you kind of have to follow suit as well. Now, DM did allow Barbarian to not be part of any military, but it should have been harder for him to be involved with the rebel army or even the military army because he has no relations with either side, other than them fighting the antagonist army. Which brings me to the last point with Barbarian. You cannot take control of the story, and if things don't go your way, punching your way through it. Villains will lie and scheme to achieve their goals. Dice will not always be in your favor when you try to do a roleplay scene that is important, and that is still okay. Sometimes, even a failed roll can make the story interesting, but that does not mean your character and you as the player should just throw a hissy fit. Plus, personally, I think Barbarian should not have been allowed to say anything to the bad guy because he was not part of the rebel army and therefore should not have any information at all. Finally, the DM of the story. Stop giving in to players when they bitch and moan. You have the final say in this game because it is your game. I understand that you were disheartened after what happened in the first story, but that does not mean you need to bend over backwards to please all the players. Sometimes, if something is too much or just doesn't fit the narrative, you can say no, which in a way you did towards the end of the story. Still need to work on it, but we still have 3 more stories to go. The third story is titled, A Player Wraps Whole Campaign Around Himself. So our group has this established kind of Revolutionary War-inspired homebrew D&D campaign. Now, this campaign had a few problems in the past. A DM with inability to say no and players who like to exploit that. But we were able to resolve them, and for the past 8 sessions or so, it has been running smoothly with everyone enjoying it, as far as I can tell. A friend of a player, we'll call him Frank, that was his character's name. This game is so niche that if its participants read this, they'll recognize themselves anyways, wants to join, and DM agrees to that. The player announces that he wants his character to be a general with the rebel army. The DM says something like, no, I'm not letting anyone be anything so important. You could be a lieutenant or maybe a captain though. They talk this over for like an hour and finally settle on that he gets to be a major. Wait, isn't major like above a lieutenant?
A few moments later.
So only based off of during the time frame of the Revolutionary War, major is 2 ranks above a lieutenant. I'm sure this won't bite the DM in the ass later. Then he also says he wants to be a noble, to which the DM says that's fine, but since you're rebelling against the kind and his noble, that may come with some baggage. He says that's fine, he just wants to claim the benefits of a noble background and be rich. Another player, whom we will call Erwin by the name of his character, points out he should maybe have soldier background so he could have some NPC troops with him. Frank says he should get them anyways, insisting he should get both backgrounds because he has both of those things. After another half an hour of argument, Frank settles on noble. They start fleshing out his backstory. The detail that will be relevant is that another noble family embarrassed Frank's, which made him an outcast within high society and prompted him to join the rebels. A very shy player, True, who's friends with Frank, seems very, very embarrassed by then. Now, our last player arrives late. First thing she does is to show us a piece of art she commissioned about her character, Veronica. Well, it's a very nice piece of art, but it has the adverse effect of making Frank very into her character. It's not lewd art or anything of the sorts. That makes him the second player in the campaign to be so. Our barbarian, Fallen, has been flirting with her, in character, through a total of 10 sessions and been rejected every time. Veronica is a nun. Finally, we get to the session itself. DM has barely begun to explain the situation he's been planning up when Frank announces that he has some new orders for Erwin, whose character is a lieutenant and thus Frank's subordinate. We ask him if he was okay with that, and he was. Frank says there is an enemy weapons depot a few towns away, and Erwin needs to go and burn it. Erwin asks whether they should rather focus on the situation at hand, but Frank tells him to stop questioning him. Off we go. My character Jake, who is a Metella and a Pathfinder, Drew, who is an army cook, Erwin and his 40 NPC soldiers. Fallen, Frank, and Veronica stayed in town to investigate the original plot of the session. Veronica does that while Fallen and Frank mostly try to get a moment to do a romantic advance on her. Me, Drew, and Erwin get to the place we were supposed to burn, after a lot of peril, mind you. Only it doesn't appear to be a weapon depot, but a mansion of a civilian family lives in. We chat with them for some information, and we players realize that this family was the one who accused Frank's issues. Our characters just conclude that they got some bad intel. We headed back again, suffered a lot of peril. 3 NPC soldiers died, and Erwin drops to 0 HP, and we need to carry him back on stretchers. Veronica is our party's healer, and it pisses Frank off greatly that she is healing Erwin and his NPCs. We gave Frank our report, and he is very pissed to find out we didn't burn the house. Erwin asks why we should have burned it, and Frank tells his backstory. Erwin, the character, is mad as hell and declares he will take no further orders from Frank. Frank declares Erwin is an insubordinate and says he will take Erwin to a court-martial. Veronica starts flirting with Erwin, apparently to piss Frank off. Fallen, in turn, is very offended by that. He's been trying to create romance with her for eternity, and she decided to go for someone else. Veronica reminds that her character is not a prize for someone, but will romance who she pleases. Then the session ends. True apologized to the rest of us that Frank appears to be kind of a bad fit for our campaign. Erwin says that dealing with random bullshit by superiors is the truest experience there ever was, so he doesn't mind him. Veronica says she doesn't mind him either, she's just sad we didn't get to see what DM had planned for us. Next session is to be Erwin's court-martial, and I am horrifyingly curious as to how that will go. End of story 3. So I was partially joking that the DM's decision for letting Frank be a major wouldn't bite him in the ass, but glad it's a small bite, but a bite no less. I took a look at the comic section for this story because people made comments on some good points that would lead to Frank getting in trouble. Basically, using his position as major to have his lieutenant and soldiers, including Metellaman and cooks, go on a false information mission to burn down a civilian home for a personal vendetta. While OP does mention that classism is a big part of this game, it shouldn't matter with Frank because, according to the story itself, Frank has been outcast after said family embarrassed him, and that's why he joined the rebel army. Of course, our next story is going to be the court-martial session, so let's see how this goes down. Also, shout out to Veronica the Sorcerer for pulling a mix of Princess Leia and Princess Jasmine moves because that was awesome. Everyone, take notes. The fourth story is titled, A Chaos Incarnate Joins, Tramples Over Shy DM in Attempt to Kill Other PCs. 2 sessions ago, a player joined our established Revolutionary War-inspired, fairly story-driven D&D campaign. He started causing chaos session 1, but by the end of session 2, he has our group split in 2 trying to kill each other. The basic story of the setting is a colony rebelling against a larger kingdom, and we sided with the rebels. Gonna refer everyone by names of their characters. These characters are relevant to the group. Me, Jake, a militant man currently acting as a scout and local guide for the rebel army. Veronica, a nun who travels around healing people. Erwin, a lieutenant with the rebel army with a neat detailed NPC platoon to boot. Finally, Frank, a major with the rebel army, a friend of True, and a chaos incarnate, probably. 2 sessions ago, Frank sent 3 PCs to burn down a house he claimed to be a weapons depot, but it was in fact the home of a family who had wronged him in the past. 3 of those NPC soldiers got killed, and as a result, Erwin declared he will not accept any more orders from Frank. Frank in turn sent Erwin to court-martial. So we all gathered there. DM warns this is an instance of PvP of sorts and asks if both participants are fine with it. Frank and Erwin affirm so. DM lets both PCs tell their versions of events and asks for a charisma roll from Frank. A 16. DM says it's not high enough. Frank announces that, well, in fact, he bribed one of these guys. DM says that they're damn wealthy by PC standards, so there's nothing he could have offered that they'd care for. Frank demands to roll anyways, and DM gives in. A 20. Veronica steps forward and says that she in turn would like to accuse Frank of abuse of position and power, and that she can prove it by the authority of God. She's a divine soul sorcerer, and she casts Zone of Truth from a scroll that she was carrying around. Now in this setting, magic is a bit rarer than in your average D&D setting, and the judges don't seem to know what it is. We managed to prove them that she's the real deal, and she asked Frank, while he's in the zone, whether he sent Erwin and his NPCs to burn a civilian's house willingly and knowingly while misleading them about the nature of the place. Frank says no, but the DM says he is forced to answer yes. The court-martial decides to suspend Frank's commission while they investigate deeper into it. Frank and Erwin manage to get each other kicked out of the army, and the latter is facing execution. Veronica says she'd like to roll for whether she noticed anything about Frank bribing the jury member. Frank says she cannot do that retroactively, but she says she damn well can if he can retroactively decide he's bribed them. Veronica manages to find a clue in the form of a cleaning lady who overheard Frank bribing the guy. Frank announces he wants to kill her, but Veronica already took her to a safe place. So Frank orders Erwin's NPC platoon to look for the maid. The soldiers promptly tell him to f*** off. Veronica tries to sneak to the other jury members to expose the bribery, but Frank says he goes to kill her before she can do so. Veronica says he shouldn't be able to find her, but Frank insists he does. They agree to PvP. Veronica would have lost, but shooting a bunch of guns making a lot of noise, and my character Jack finally arrives there and shoots Frank with his long rifle. Frank argues he agreed to a PvP with Veronica and not with me. DM says this is indeed a bit of a contradiction in the rules of the PvP we agreed for our campaign, and finally says Frank must either stop attacking Veronica or allow me to join the fight. They go from trying to kill each other to just not doing so. Veronica goes to the other jury members who convene and meet Erwin again and decides Erwin's decision to not accepting any more orders from Frank, i.e. the insubordination they were gonna hang him for, was actually justified to preserve the lives of the soldiers and resources of the rebellion. They choose to let him walk. Frank is dismayed by this, but Veronica defends the decision of the DM and we stick with that. And yeah, then the session ends and we still have no indication as to how we are going to continue from this situation where Frank has tried to kill 2 party members and doesn't like the rest either. Go figure. I feel it's gonna be a very contrived for Frank to ever work again with Erwin or Veronica. End of story 4. Why did I have the feeling that Frank was gonna pull some sort of bullshit move during the court-martial trial? So a rule of thumb for this is before any major event happens in any game, For example, in this court-martial situation, you want to ask if he could do certain things before the event starts. If Frank had done that, it would have probably been a different situation. Of course, honestly, if I was the DM and Frank demanded a reroll because of the impromptu of, well, I just happened to remember I bribed a jury member, I would have said, okay, do you have something of value of 1,000 gold, the amount of 1,000 gold, or are you willing to put your position and possibly your life on the line, with a reminder that I am looking at the sheet if he tries to lie. If he lied, have him roll it again with disadvantage or making the DC even higher. If he says no, then keep the first roll. But honestly, go Veronica on Una reversing that situation and using the same methods as he did to make sure it was in favor of the other players. It was a brilliant play on her end. Plus, it was humorous to see how quickly Frank tucked in his tail when PvP went from Frank versus Veronica to being Frank versus Veronica and OP. But OP does bring up a good question at the end of the story. How are you going to continue the campaign from the situation where a player has tried to kill 2 other players and is not cooperating with the rest? The answer? I don't think you can. Because you either play a game where the aggressive player will try everything to take control of the campaigns, including burning everything to the ground to get his way, and unless the DM grows a backbone and puts a firm foot down on the situation, I think the game is going to end in flames. The last story that OP posted is titled, Chaos Incarnate Constantly PvPs, Dies by It, Tries to Kill His Killer with His Next Character. Last session, in short, devolved into a player, Frank by the name of his character, trying to kill 2 other characters, Erwin and Veronica. Well, today at the start of the session, the DM messaged all of us on Discord about how we'd like to proceed. He suggested Frank should make a new character since the character, Frank, isn't really on speaking terms with the characters, Erwin and Veronica. Frank refused. Well, Frank is given the job to take a group of 100 NPCs and go make contact with an independent pro-rebel Metella and bring them guns and powder. Erwin has 30 NPCs of his own from his soldier background, and they're also coming. My character is a Metella man, so he's coming to see his old buddies. The rest of us are various civilian specialists, auxiliaries, contractors who are also coming. Right, so off we go. And it's going well and good, until we came by an enemy company camp on the field. We suggest to just go around them. We're in a forest undetected. But Frank says we need to kill them, and since he, his character being a major with the rebel army, controls the bulk of the NPCs, me and Ern are supposed to help him. Our residential murder hobo barbarian, Phelan, is also hyped to get into the fight. So we make a plan which, to simplify, involve the bulk of the NPCs shooting at the enemies from cover of the forest, while a small group of NPCs go to the sides of the road the enemies will retreat to and dig in there and kill them as they come. It's approved by everyone. Me, Erwin, and Phelan go with the small group, while Frank and Veronica stay with the main group. We're halfway through stealthing our way there when an enemy scout notices Frank and they start shooting early. Well, guess the enemy will get away now. Well, no, since due to the range penalties, Frank and the NPCs fail to kill anything and this frustrates Frank, so he runs into the open. The enemy has dug themselves for cover, so they gain the benefits of a 3/4 cover. This is a +5 AC, putting them to 18 AC. I'm not sure if Frank is just sabotaging us on purpose by now, or does he simply not grasp how cover works. Anyways, 100 dudes in a 3/4 cover beats 100 dudes in the open. Phelan and Erwin decides to rush the enemy from behind, shooting at point blank, and then go melee at their behind in an attempt to salvage the situation. They, and Erwin's NPCs, do, and eventually we subdue the enemy. However, even after Veronica spends her remaining spell slots to heal our ill-fortunate NPCs, we have 20 of them dead and 31 badly wounded. Erwin says we need to go back, and I support his decision since I can totally see this becoming a TPK if we go on. Frank disagrees. He just wants to pick up where we left off. Erwin points out that we have a mere 23 NPCs left who could carry the gear we're supposed to deliver, and now the enemies are aware we are here. 2 are needed to carry each wounded. Everyone sighs because we can see this heading into another argument between Erwin and Frank. Frank says we'll just leave the wounded NPCs behind. Now, Aaron has been very cool and sensible until this point, but I guess you either die a hero or live long enough to become a villain. He requested PvP against Frank and demands he accepts because Erwin has accepted all PvPs Frank has demanded. Our campaign requires mutual consent to PvP. Frank accepts. Erwin has his NPCs to stab Frank to death. Frank protests because he agreed to PvP against Erwin, not his NPCs. Erwin says the NPCs are his background feature and hence extends of his character. DM rules in favor of Erwin and Frank is dead. We get back and Erwin reports Frank was killed by the enemy, and nobody has a particular desire to correct this. Well, Frank player demands he gets to make a new character mid-session, and our DM, maybe guilty overruling in favor of Erwin, allows it. This bard called Melissa spent the rest of the session trying to kill Erwin in turn. Erwin declines every demand to PvP because it doesn't make sense for Melissa to hate someone she's never met before. Melissa in turn says she is the daughter of Frank and hates Erwin for that. Erwin sighs and accepts the PvP. She has done the following: poison his food, blows up a wagon of gunpowder next to him, tries to shoot him, hires a group of thugs to stab him. Erwin survives, barely, with luck and Veronica's all healing spell slots. In the end of the session, after the others have left, me and Veronica demand the DM to kick Frank Melissa player for constant metagaming and non-stop PvP. We can hear this makes the DM nearly sob. He's just a bit too nice of a guy who doesn't want to make anyone sad, but he promised to consider it at least. End of Saga. That is the end of the saga. It's been years since OP posted this saga, and there have been no updates since. I was reading the comments to the last story, and a lot of people are upset with DM for being a doormat. Some are upset with Erwin for basically using his NPC platoon to take care of Frank during the PvP battle, and some people are questioning on why the party continue playing with someone like Frank, especially since he shouldn't be in a high position anymore since the court-martial situation happened. Here are a couple of theories that I am guessing happened after the story got posted. Either A, DM had a talk with Frank about his behavioral problems, Frank denies it, DM lets Frank continue to play in the campaign, causing the others, OP, Veronica, and possibly Erwin, to leave said campaign. B, DM had a talk with Frank, which he freaks out about. DM finally snaps out of being the doorman and finally kicks Frank out, and the rest of the party continues to play without too much trouble besides in-game situations. Or C, DM nukes the whole campaign because he couldn't deal with it anymore. It seems like DM was gonna put the campaign on hiatus in the second story before they were convinced by the others, who still wanted to continue playing the game. It's admirable, but to what expense? I know I made my comments about the DM, but look at it in a different angle. DM is playing a three-way tug-of-war game between wanting to make his players happy versus not wanting anyone to be mad or upset with the DM for a decision that was made versus the DM's own happiness. If this DM happens to watch this video, I have to ask, if you are still DMing this game, are you happy with what happened? From the attempted in-game situation to having a murder hobo barbarian who demanded certain things and seemed like he barely got punished for his actions, to the whole Frank fiasco situation, it seems your mental well-being, solely based on the OP's description, is becoming worse and worse. I get that you want your players to have fun and be happy, but you have the right to set boundaries. You have the right to say no. If that person gets upset because you told them no, that's more or less of a them problem than a you problem. And if they still throw a hissy fit after a discussion about it, then maybe they aren't cut out for this game. I seriously hope for the best, but as far as I can see, I won't hold my breath for it. Thank you for watching this video. If you enjoyed this video, please don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe to my channel. If you'd like to give me more support, you can follow me on my socials through my Linktree, and if you have stories you want me to read, please post them on my subreddit or email it to me. Until then, may you find your worth in the waking world.